Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
It's Season 2, Episode 65. We are just around the corner from some playoff action tomorrow. We got a couple games getting underway. The game of the week, however, though, that we got to talk about, Austin, it's a rematch of Week 5. The Steelers and Jaguars face off again, but before we get into that, let's cover some NFL news real quick. So, for some games coming up this weekend, Patriots wide receiver Chris Hogan was cleared to play against the Titans tomorrow. I think that's the first time he's played since at least midseason. The Bills just fired their offensive coordinator, Rick Dennison, after one season, and I wasn't sure if you had gotten a chance to see this, Austin, but ESPN started their search of a replacement for John Gruden, who had been the color commentator in at the Monday Night Football booth. Steve Young reportedly turned down the job, and Matt Hasselbeck was called on to replace John Gruden in their final broadcast at the Pro Bowl this year. Beyond that, several other names have been attached to the Monday Night Football opening, including Peyton Manning, Kurt Warner, Randy Moss, Rex Ryan, Tim Tebow, and Bruce Arians, among a whole other batch of names. So I guess just initial thoughts. Do any of those names interest you in particular?
Well, I can tell you right off the bat, two of them don't. I don't like Randy Moss, and I don't like Tim Tebow. I can't imagine them being commentators. As for the rest, I'm thinking my favorite to lead is Peyton Manning. Just because I guess for some people, Tony Romo has been hit or miss based on his commentary. I like Tony Romo's commentary. I think Peyton Manning might be able to do the same. Plus, I think he's just got a good voice for commentating. As for the rest, I think Rex Ryan is my second favorite. I really like. He's just a funny guy. I think. I mean, in one of his broadcasts, I wasn't a big fan of him, but I feel like he could be good as he could be a good replacement for John Gruden. And then I think I like Bruce Arians next, but Bruce Arians already said he would curse too much if he did it, so he's going to turn that down immediately. And he's going to say he said he would lose a whole paycheck because of his cursing. But then I think Kurt Warner is my last favorite. I mean, we've seen him before. I don't know. I just feel like he wouldn't do a good job replacing John Gruden. I mean, I guess anyone really could because John Gruden wasn't that great. But I feel like right now leading the pack for me is easily Peyton Manning. So what do you think on those guys?
I have pretty similar thoughts to you, Austin. Peyton Manning seems to me like the most charismatic of that group, and I personally love Tony Romo's commentary this year, and I think Peyton Manning could bring something similar on that end. Plus, he's a fantastic quarterback mind. We could go through kind of what quarterbacks are thinking about when he's in the booth, so I think he'd be great there. I think Kurt Warner would be okay. I don't think he'd be great, but I know I've seen him as an analyst on NFL Network in the past, and I think he's been okay. Randy Moss, Rex Ryan, they're a couple of interesting people for me, or I guess Bruce Arians too. I kind of agree with you. I don't really see Randy Moss as a color commentator. He seems more to me as someone that could entertain people as opposed to actually provide insight into the game. Rex Ryan could do that, but I kind of, for the same reason that Bruce Arians wouldn't want to do this job, is kind of why I feel like Rex Ryan wouldn't be a good choice. I'd be kind of surprised if we didn't hear him cursing or something like that. But you said he's done broadcasts before. Do you remember what he's done?
It was a game early on in this season, I believe. I might be confusing him with someone else now that I think about it. I think he was with a woman. No, I think it definitely was him because I texted my friends saying who was it? They're like, it's Rex Ryan. It was a game earlier this season that he actually did a broadcast of.
Well, I don't know. I feel like that would be kind of interesting. And then last but not least, we have Tim Tebow, who I just feel like would be better for the college game. He didn't have a long pro career, and he struggled with his mechanics, but I mean, he was a college football legend, and he's already been an analyst for ESPN's college football, so might as well just keep him there if you ask me. All right, let's move on to some Steelers news.
1 second.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
He did Monday night for the Broncos-Chargers game. I knew it was one game. I just couldn't remember which one. So that was his debut, was the Monday night against Chargers Broncos.
That was week 1, right?
I don't remember.
I would imagine so, because normally it would have been McDonough and Gruden in the booth, and I think that was the same week the Saints played the Vikings on Monday Night Football, so I believe that was week 1. All right.
It was Monday Night Football.
It was.
No, I mean, he did. It was Chargers Broncos on Monday Night Football, so it couldn't have been week 1 if Saints Vikings were.
Week 1, they have 2 Monday Night Football games.
There you go. You're right. My bad.
All right. So Steelers news. Let's talk about legacies, Austin. We've got a few players who could have potentially legacy-defining postseason games coming up. So let's assume that the Steelers win Sunday, then they go to Foxborough and beat the Patriots, because I think we're safe in assuming that the Patriots are going to dispatch the Titans, and then they win the Super Bowl. What does that do for the legacy of some of these players? And we'll talk specifically about guys like Cameron Hayward, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell. But let's start with Ben Roethlisberger, the guy who's looking to add his 3rd Super Bowl ring.
Well, if you didn't think he was a Hall of Famer yet, that just really secures it. It should secure it for everyone. There should be no more people saying that he is a Hall of Famer. I personally already thought he's a Hall of Famer, but that would secure it for everyone else. As people think Eli Manning will get into the Hall of Fame for his 2 Super Bowl wins, well, Ben would have 3 and had played at a high level for his entire career. So I think that would just really secure his shot into the Hall of Fame and it's so hard to say because I really didn't give it much thought on the quarterbacks of all time. But I'll say for safety, I want to put him in top 10, but I'll say top 15 quarterbacks of all time with that win. What do you think on the subject?
Yeah, well, on top of the Manning comparison, he's actually been to another Super Bowl too, so that means he'd have double the appearances and 3 wins as opposed to 2. Right now, Ben Roethlisberger is definitely a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's been one of the most successful and efficient of all time. Should he be able to lead the Steelers to victories over the Jaguars, the Patriots, and the NFC Championship, or the NFC Championship team, I think we're going to be talking about one of the best ever. You're talking about a quarterback that a lot of it has to do with Tom Brady and the Patriots, a team that has consistently bested the Steelers over the last, 10, 15 years. It would be a seismic shift in legacy for Roethlisberger, if you will, if he's able to come up with a victory in Foxborough in the playoffs, something only 2 quarterbacks have done recently, and that was Joe Flacco, who did it twice going back to 2009, and Mark Sanchez in 2010. So I think that, and then punctuating that with another championship, could end the conversation about, or I guess end the debate between who's the best Steelers quarterback of all time, whether it's Bradshaw because he won 4 Super Bowls, or Roethlisberger because of the numbers he's put up and all the wins he's had. I think another Super Bowl and winning it in this fashion would be enough to put Roethlisberger ahead of Bradshaw convincingly, and I think it would put him in the top 10 quarterbacks list of all time. Now, we haven't made a list per se, but that's just, I would have to think, I'd have a hard time thinking of more than 9 quarterbacks who would be better than Ben Roethlisberger should this happen. Now, obviously, there hasn't been a ton of analysis, but that's just my initial thoughts on the matter. But winning Super Bowl championships is kind of different for positions. So I guess we've got team leaders for the quarterback, and we've got Cameron Hayward, the defensive lineman. But what about guys like Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown? Guys who are at the top of their respective positions, but what would a Super Bowl or a dominant run towards a championship mean for these guys? Let's start with Bell.
Well, Bell is still young. He has plenty of time for his career to change directions. Right now, I don't see that, but he could go downhill in an instant. Football changes like that. Someone could be good one year, and then the next year they're just done. So I feel like it's hard to say a Super Bowl will impact him, especially as a running back. I feel like it isn't as important as a running back as it is to a quarterback's legacy. If anything, what this does in general is it really allows him to move if he wants to. He has the ring, so if the Steelers don't want to pay his high price tag, he could leave to secure the bag with greater confidence, as he already has a ring under his belt, opening up his possibilities to teams that possibly aren't that great. And that's also assuming the Steelers don't franchise tag him, which they should, but in case they're like, all right, we'll let you go because we know you don't want to be here. So that's what I think a Super Bowl win would do for him. What do you think a Super Bowl win would do for Bell?
Well, I think for Bell, this postseason run is probably more about his Steelers legacy as opposed to his career legacy. Unless if Bell wins the Super Bowl MVP, I think that we could be talking about a guy who is likely going to have the next few games determine whether or not he leaves the Steelers or not. If he can go on a tear like he did at the start of last year's playoffs and win the MVP of the Super Bowl, I think he could become an all-time Steeler great. But it's unlikely he's going to surpass Jerome Bettis or Franco Harris's numbers unless if he signs a long-term deal, which is unlikely at best at this point. But as far as his legacy right now, I think you'd have a hard time arguing with me that he's not the most talented running back in Steelers history. I mean, Harris and Bettis were great running backs, but they haven't been able to do all the great things Bell can do. He can catch passes, he can run the ball, he can block. I mean, it's just, if he played in Pittsburgh for 10 years, I think we'd be talking about the best running back in team history. But I think this would have more to do with his career-long arc since it's likely he's not going to spend his whole career in Pittsburgh. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I don't think he's spending his entire time in Pittsburgh. I don't think Pittsburgh has the money to pay him that he wants. It's just hard for me to say that he's going to stay there his entire career.
Running back is such a tough position to account for, too, and then you have the injuries and suspensions, and you have the fact that you can find guys that not necessarily can do everything that he can do, but you can find a Christian McCaffrey that can catch a ton of passes. You can find, even Fitzgerald Toussaint's a great blocker. I'm not saying he's anything like the player Le'Veon Bell is, but look at what the Patriots are doing with Rex Burkhead, James White, and Deion Lewis. They're do-it-all running backs, and they all aren't making a ton of money. The three of them make less than what Bell made this year, and they've all been able to recreate at least part of his game. So that's an argument for another time, but it's something to think about. So what about Brown, on the other hand, now?
Well, if Brown could have a big postseason run, he may just be able to secure his Hall of Fame entry as well. It's way harder for a receiver to predict whether there will be Hall of Fame worthy or what will even get them into the Hall of Fame. But I think with a big run in the postseason, really his first, it should be able to help his case for the Hall of Fame. What do you think for Brown?
Well, I'd say at worst he's a borderline Hall of Famer right now. Another dominant postseason run for Brown likely cements his legacy as an all-time great player. Going on a run of the last 5 years that only Jerry Rice has had prior, Brown is trying to become a champion, and once he's done that, he'll have done pretty much everything you'd have want a receiver to have done over that stretch. After that, it's all about consistency and just producing for the remainder of his career, but he's put up huge numbers, and becoming a postseason performer is something that you can add to your legacy, and once you've done that, he's done just about everything. So I think you're talking about someone that could elevate his status a little bit more in this one. On the defensive side, a little bit of an more interesting one, probably not in the NFL status, but at least in Steelers lore. We could be talking about Cameron Hayward as one of the best defensive linemen in team history after a potential dominant playoff run. What do you see about Cam Hayward if he picks up, say, 5 or 6 sacks in these 3 games?
I don't think a good postseason is really going to do much for him. I think he's going to be Steelers great, possibly, but I'm not sure he will achieve more than that. He's a great player, but for me, a good postseason run won't even do much for his Steelers legacy unless he's like super clutch in this run. Like he does, these sacks are in important times where you're gonna like remember these sacks. I feel like sacks aren't as memorable as like forced fumble or interception for good reason. Obviously, those are turnovers, but so it's hard for me to say that getting a good amount of sacks from him will really change his outlook for the team. I do think he will be a Steelers great, but as for anything else, I'm not sure. What do you think?
I think that 5 to 6 sacks helps. I agree with you that individual performance isn't necessarily going to help Hayward, but I think a lot hinges on the potential rematch in Foxborough. If the Steelers can somehow win there and Cam Hayward leads an inspired defensive performance, even if he doesn't pick up a ton of sacks, if he's the guy that's leading the charge there, and he's the guy that makes a couple big plays in those 3 games, even if it's not the big ones that we're always talking about, I think we could be talking about Cameron Hayward as one of the 4 best defensive linemen in Steelers history. I honestly believe that. behind guys like Joe Green, Ernie Stautner, and maybe L.C. Greenwood. I think his impressive comeback season, finishing with 12 sacks on the year, earning All-Pro status, means that he has given himself the stage to become an all-time great. So that'll be the furthest we look into next week for now anyways. So let's refocus the attention back on Jaguars-Steelers. It's important not to overlook the Jaguars, who beat the Steelers 30-9 in Week 5 this year. Let's take a look at the injury report, Austin. Only one player on the Steelers injury report. It's Antonio Brown, who is questionable, recovering from his calf injury he suffered against the Patriots 3 weeks ago. And he missed practice today with an illness. Now, Mike Tomlin said that he's expected to play, but is the illness something we should be really worried about?
From what I heard, he was only sent home just to make sure other people didn't get sick. I'm fairly confident he will play. I think that was just a precautionary measure. If you remember last year's playoffs, there was that big flu that went around the Steelers locker room right before a playoff game, so they're probably just trying to avoid that this year. I think he's going to be a full go this weekend. What do you think?
I'm in complete agreement. You're right. It seems more like a precautionary measure than anything else. Couple players questionable for the Jaguars: linebacker Blair Brown with an ankle injury, and receiver Jaden Mickens with a hamstring injury. The key guys we were talking about throughout the week for both teams were all full participants today on both teams. So that includes guys like Artie Burns, Stephon Tuitt, and Javon Hargrave. And for the Jaguars, Paul Posluszny, Telvin Smith, and Aaron Coleman were also full participants. Backup center B.J. Finney also had his full participation in practice today for the first time since his injury at the season finale last week. I guess it was technically last year too, so I'll give myself that one. But in any case, it looks like both teams are relatively healthy as far as who's going to be playing and who's not. And the Steelers are getting a big boost. It looked like Hargrave, Tuitt, and Burns, all of a sudden, who ended up on the injury report, there was some concern, but it looks like they're going to play, so that's a good sign. So as far as the history between these two teams, we already covered it in Week 5. Not much has changed, but obviously the last result was a big 30-9 win for the Jaguars. The Jaguars have won the only postseason matchup between these two teams. It was 10 years ago. The Jaguars beat the Steelers 31-29 in the wild card round, and that year the Jaguars became the only team to ever beat the Steelers twice in a season at Heinz Field. So they beat the Steelers in the 2007 regular season at Heinz Field as well. So I guess let's look back at that Week 5 game, Austin. 30-9. You've seen the key stats there. I guess, what are your thoughts on this game? Was it as bad as the score indicated?
No, 14 points came from pick sixes, and that basically limited the run game, as the Steelers had to play the pass to keep up with that. Not only that, but Leonard Fournette got a long touchdown in garbage time. So you take away those pick sixes and that garbage time touchdown, and that game is tied 9-9. Really, those pick sixes are what killed the Steelers, as they weren't able to effectively run as they got put behind so quickly in the second quarter. Really, all the picks were what was detrimental for the Steelers in that game. Otherwise, I think the Steelers outmatched them pretty heavily, despite the score looking heavily in favor of the Jaguars. I really think that was on the singular performance on Big Ben that loss that it came out so bad. But I don't think that's going to happen this time. I think that it wasn't as bad as the score indicated. It was just Roethlisberger having probably the worst game of his career. What do you think?
It's also important to mention that the Jaguars' defensive front was pretty effective in that game at the pass rush. All 5 of Roethlisberger's interception resulted in some sort of pressure. And I'm not saying he's absolved of all responsibility on those. He still threw 5 interceptions, but at the same time, it was just not a good day for the Steelers' offensive unit. But, all week we've been hearing about how the Jaguars crushed the Steelers and blew them out. But the final score may have indicated that. But where there are often games that look closer because the team that is down by a lot of scores actually manages to put up some points in garbage time to make the score look closer, this time I'd actually argue that the game was closer than the score indicates. Leonard Fournette's 90-yard touchdown run came after Ben Roethlisberger's desperation 5th interception of the day, and the Steelers' defense was facing a 23-9 deficit with less than 2 minutes to go. The game was over, so that run was meaningless in my mind. Beyond that, the Steelers weren't playing a great game, but they were leading 9-7 midway through the third quarter before Roethlisberger threw his pick sixes. This was a game that the Steelers weren't controlling, but they were still ahead. Once the Telvin Smith pick six happened, that's where the game really turned on its head. So as far as the Week 5 matchup goes, the Steelers weren't in gear offensively, and the Jaguars didn't exactly run all over them. It was more so a long run that turned the stats on its head. Because if you looked at Leonard Fournette's statistics before that 90-yard run, he was averaging, I think, 3.4 yards a carry. So he definitely wasn't tearing it up, as one would think by looking at 181 rushing yards. So Austin, a lot has been made, and, we just talked about it. The Steelers' offense versus the Jaguars' defense, the best pass defense in the league, a team that was second in the NFL in sacks and had, the two best cornerbacks in the league. What are the Steelers going to do on offense to make sure that this result is different than the one that they had in Week 5?
Well, despite going against possibly the best defense in the league, I feel that the offense is going to come out firing in this game, and they're just going to wipe the floor with the Jaguars, to be honest with you. I feel really good. The offense just has to keep up with a Blake Bortles-led team, and seeing last week, I'm not very concerned about that. In my mind, Ben would have to mirror his performance in Week 5 to lose this game, or at least throw 3 picks. I can't see that happening, as that game was the turning point for Ben. From that point on, he got much better and returned to Ben of old. He hasn't looked back since. Even if he throws 1 pick six in this game, which I don't think he will throw any, I still think the Steelers could still pull out a win. That's because they have Le'Veon Bell. And last time, he wasn't exactly used probably on the ground because the game got out of hand quickly. But I believe this time he will have a much better day, even though the Jaguars' run defense got better with the addition of Marcel Darius. It's not only my faith in Bell, though. I believe Juju Smith-Schuster and Martavis Bryant have both gotten better since that Week 5 game. And it's not even like Juju had a bad game the first time, so I think they could really go off here. I wouldn't say that the Jaguars' defensive backs got any better. They have basically been consistently great all season, so I feel like it's the Steelers receivers that have gotten better against a unit that has already probably been the best in the league. There's not much improvement there. Also, Vance McDonald has gotten better as well. He didn't contribute anything in that Week 5 loss. He was targeted twice. He had 0 receptions. But I feel like in this one, he will also make a difference, as he has shown to be a threat at times in the receiving game. And we already know he's a really good run blocker, so I expect good things out of him. I don't know. I just smell a good day for the offense here. Maybe the injured glasses, though. I have high hopes. What do you see from the offense coming into this game?
Again, it's been the talk of, can the Jaguars defense force Ben Roethlisberger to throw 5 picks again? To be honest, I just don't see any way that happens this time around. Now, let me be clear. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to what is likely the league's best defense. They won 10 games with Blake Bortles at quarterback, and it's not just that they won. They've won with a terrific pass rush and the best defensive backfield in the NFL. They're all great and individual standouts, but they aren't without their flaws either, even if they don't have many. There are a few reasons why I think the Steelers are going to fare better offensively this week than they did last time. And number one, Austin, just as you mentioned, it's Le'Veon Bell. He had just 15 carries in this game, and now part of this is because the Steelers' offensive line wasn't giving him a ton of room to run with, and the game did get out of hand in the third quarter. But that being the case, I think Bell is going to get at least 20 carries in this one, so that gives the Steelers a better chance at creating that offensive balance that so many teams strive for. Number two, the receivers not named Brown have finally found their roles and have emerged. Obviously, Juju Smith-Schuster has broken out this year in a big way, and Martavis Bryant has elevated his level of play in the second half of the season. It's helped turn the Steelers' passing offense around. And even without Antonio Brown for the better part of the last 3 weeks, Bryant and Smith-Schuster have showed that they can carry the load without Brown. Bryant wasn't effective last time, and Smith-Schuster was still finding his way. And number three, the Steelers have had the league's best passing offense in the second half of the NFL season. Again, contributing with partially number two, they've been firing on all cylinders, and they're certainly a more gelled and effective unit than the Jaguars saw in Week 5. On offense, I want to see more balance from the Steelers. Don't be afraid to spread out the Jaguars, but don't do it too often. And in the same consequence there, don't bunch it up and run 2 tight ends 30 times on Sunday. Remember, the Jaguars are the team that's trying to shorten the game with the rushing attack, so don't be afraid to be aggressive, but also take what the defense gives you. I'd be shocked to see another performance like we saw in Week 5, and I find it more likely that we see a team that moves the ball effectively but also doesn't light up the scoreboard. It's important to remember that one area where both the Jaguars' offense and defense holds strong advantages over the Steelers' offense and defense is red zone play. The Jaguars have scored a lot of touchdowns in the red zone and haven't given up many touchdowns in the red zone, while conversely, the Steelers don't have a great percentage in either statistic for their offense and defense. So, that being the case, Austin, for the defense, you'd have to think this is pretty simple. It was pretty simple last time, but they also didn't get it done then either. So, I guess, are there any changes that have to be made here?
Well, the defense has one job and one job only, and that's forcing Bortles to throw. It would be just to shut down Fournette in the running game, but seeing what happened to the Bills last week, they're going to have to keep Bortles contained as well, as he had a career-high 88 rushing yards. The Steelers have struggled against quarterbacks who can run, so what I'm honestly hoping for is 5 blitzers. The Jaguars call themselves Jacksonville, but the Steelers are the number 1 sack defense in the league and one of the best on the blitz. I feel like if they got to the point where they got Bortles to throw, it would be more beneficial to have a 5th blitzer rather than rush 4 and have a quarterback spy. That is, of course, if Leonard Fournette can be shut down. We saw him be relatively quiet until the end in Week 5, but that was with Ryan Shazier, so I'm a bit more concerned this time. But I do still have high hopes as the run game is all they're going to have to guard against, really. If Bortles dots them up anyway, it will be the most disappointing thing ever, as he is shown to be a below-average, at best, quarterback. But you know what? I guess I can't put it past the defense as of late, but I really, really hope not. What do you think about the Steelers defense coming into this game?
Well, as I said, it's pretty interesting to me because on one hand, you'd want to see the Steelers stop the run better, but at the same time, they did a pretty darn good job in Week 5. Now, they weren't great, obviously. You know, they finished with terrible numbers, but for the most part in that game, when it was still a game, they played pretty well. But at the same time, you have to think about this from the Jaguars' perspective, Austin. If you're Jacksonville and you're going into Heinz Field, say you start with the ball, it's 0-0, you know that if you're Jacksonville, you have to score. You're likely going to have to score at least once on defense, and you're going to need big plays to move the ball in this one because you know Leonard Fournette hasn't been as good as in the second half of the year as he was in the first half of the year. Would you try throwing it deep on the first play of the game, maybe like a play-action fake, knowing how often the Steelers have been gashed? Or I guess beaten over the top?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Go ahead.
You go.
No, I was trying to clean up my statement. I was saying gashed, and that's more for running plays. I meant more so getting beaten over the top by the long pass play, which we've seen a lot of this year.
I feel like the Jaguars should do that. I feel like it would catch the Steelers by surprise. If I'm part of the Jaguars organization, I want them to take them by surprise and have Bortles throw a deep ball on the first play, which the Steelers have been beaten by that this year. So I guess it's not the biggest surprise, but I feel like they should attempt it. They should come out strong and confident if they want to try and win this. Their offense is really going to be in control of this because I know their defense can play pretty well, but their offense is really the question marks for them.
Well, let me add a little bit more as to why I think the Jaguars are going to be aggressive early. So, number one, they've leaned heavily on Leonard Fournette this season, and it's clear he's hit the rookie wall. A long NFL season with injuries and a ton of carries seems to have slowed him down over the last few weeks. The Jaguars finished near the bottom of the league in passing attempts this year and led the NFL in rushing. I felt that was more so because they force-fed their backs as opposed to having them run wild. You look at their top 2 running backs in Leonard Fournette and Chris Ivory, they both averaged under 4 yards a carry this season. Number 2, the Steelers' pass defense, as we just talked about, has been horrible, especially in the second half of the season. They've given up a ton of big plays, and this is where the big matchup is. Blake Bortles hasn't completed many. I think he's completed one pass of 40 or more yards this year, and the Steelers have given up, I think, something like 10 of those pass plays. I can't remember exactly what the stat is, but the point is the Steelers give up a lot of those big passes. Bortles doesn't complete many of those, so I'd have to think that trend is going to change for one of those teams in this upcoming football game. So the way I see it is that Oh, and number 3, I forgot. The Steelers have also allowed the highest passer rating against any quarterback this year off of play action. So the way I see it is that the Jaguars are going to try to take advantage of the Steelers' poor pass defense by being surprisingly aggressive and throwing deep on their first couple of drives. If the Steelers can prevent those big plays and they can show that they're not going to be tricked into giving up those longer gains, it's going to come down to simply not allowing Leonard Fournette to break tackles and pick up those first downs that he picked up in the first matchup. The Steelers should be able to effectively pressure Bortles if the Steelers gain the lead. The Jaguars gave up only 24 sacks on the year, but as I said before, they didn't throw the ball a ton. The Steelers led the NFL in sacks with just one more than the Jaguars with the 56-55 advantage. Last time in Week 5, the Steelers had 2 sacks on just 16 dropbacks, so that's a pretty good percentage right there, even if they only had 2 sacks in the game. So, Austin, what does the special teams matchup look like in this one? I'll let you take this one in full.
Sure. The Jaguars' special teams is one of the worst in the league. While their average punt is higher than the Steelers, punt average, I apologize, which shows they have a better punter, they have a worse net average, ranking 30th, while the Steelers rank 23rd in net average, which shows the performance of the coverage team. Not only that, the Steelers have a higher field goal percentage at 92%, ranking 5th in the league, compared to the Jaguars' 86%, which is tied for 13th in the league. Also, the Steelers are 4 for 4 on field goals of 50 yards or more, while the Jaguars are 2 for 5 on field goals of 50 yards or more. So, but to wrap up special teams, Jaguars are one of the worst teams on kickoffs, averaging 59.5 yards on kickoffs, which ranks 29th in the league. And they have also kicked out of bounds twice, which is tied for the worst in the league. While on the other hand, Steelers average 63.6 yards on kickoffs, which ranks 8th in the league, and have only kicked out of bounds once. Basically, the Steelers have the Jaguars completely outmatched on special teams. They also are better on kickoff returns. I said that really weird, but average return yards. Jaguars are tied for 20th, while the Steelers rank 18th, which I was surprised about. I thought the Steelers were really bad on kickoff returns, but I guess that probably Juju's return probably brought it up and fixed it for them. But that's really it for special teams.
Alrighty, Austin. Give me your key to the game on offense for the Steelers.
For offense, it is to don't give up on the rushing game. If anything was shown by the Titans-Chiefs game, it's okay to rush if that's what's working, even when you're down. Last time the Steelers went under quickly and had to abandon it. If they go down by even 14, I hope to see them rushing it still, even though I can't even see them being down by 14 in this game. So there's that. What is your offensive key?
Don't be afraid to punt, and conversely, don't turn the ball over. And by that, I mean the Steelers are facing the league's best defensive backfield in a game where they're facing Blake Bortles, who had a stretch of some of the worst football he's ever played the last few weeks, and that's really saying something. This Jaguars defense is likely going to have to score on its own, and they're going to have to make several short fields for its offense in order to win this week. As long as the Steelers aren't overly aggressive, their talent should be enough to come through enough in this one. So punting in this one isn't the end of the world if your third down options are shut down. On defense, I'll jump into it. Don't be a hero, and this goes for everybody. Stay within your assignments, and you should have no problem stopping this Jaguars offense. They aren't explosive, and their top weapon in Fournette has slowed down significantly in the second half of the year. As long as the linemen and linebackers are responsible in their gaps and the defensive backs don't bite on the play action, they should be able to stop this Jaguars offense. What's your defensive key for the Steelers?
It's to contain the quarterback. As I said earlier, the Steelers have struggled with letting quarterbacks run. So not only will they have to try and keep Fournette in check in the rushing game, they also need to make sure Bortles stays in the pocket when he is forced to throw. And that wraps it up for my keys. So let's go straight into X Factors. Who is your offensive X Factor for this game?
It's the tight end Vance McDonald. A lot of attention is going to be paid to the receivers and obviously Antonio Brown. Not sure who A.J. Bouye is going to be lined up on, whether it's going to be Smith-Schuster or Bryant. So for that reason, I decided to go with Vance McDonald. In the Week 5 matchup between these two teams, McDonald actually didn't even have a single catch on the year. He was still looking for his first catch on the season. That was hard for me to believe, Austin. I don't know if you remember that. Do you remember when his first catch was?
I do not remember. Was it against the Ravens?
I don't know. It was, but it was taken away from penalty. That's what it was.
Oh, okay. Where was it then? Where was the real first catch?
His first catch was, I think, a 25-yard gain deep in the Steelers' shadow of their own end zone. We saw this game together, the Chiefs game.
Yep, now I remember.
So the point is, McDonald still didn't have a catch at this point, and the Jaguars are going to be focused on slowing down the Steelers' talented receiver. I think that could allow for McDonald, who could finally be close to 100% healthy for the first time this season, to have that breakout game we've been waiting for all year. Beyond that, McDonald's ability as a blocker is well documented, and against a big Jaguars defensive front where that's really their only weakness, it's going to be necessary that he blocks well in order to aid Le'Veon Bell in the ground game. Conversely, who do you think is going to be an X factor on offense this week?
Juju Smith-Schuster for me. I really think he's come a long way since that Week 5 game, and I mean that in a good way. I feel like Ramsey's going to have a better day against Brown this time, so I'm leaving it up to Juju to be the threat in the pass game despite being up against the other Jaguars corners. I'm assuming it's probably going to be AJ Bouye, but we will see. Who's your defensive X factor?
Mine is Sean Davis, and it's not someone you probably typically think in this kind of game, but when the opposition is going to be running the ball a lot, I would think that Davis is going to be a guy that's going to be important. He's been typically better against the run than the pass over his career. The Steelers are going to be walking him up to the line of scrimmage a lot since they obviously don't fear Blake Bortles on Sunday. And on the plays where Fournette is going to break contain, because I'm going to imagine that he's going to do that a few times because guys like Sean Spencer or LJ Fort aren't going to be as good as Shazier was, it's going to be up to Davis to clean up the mess. A good game from him here is going to limit the Jaguars' big rushes, and that's going to keep the Steelers in favorable downs where they can rush the quarterback. And obviously, you'd like your chances against Blake Bortles in that situation. So who's your defensive X factor, Austin?
For me, my defensive X factor is Javon Hargrave. Hargrave is going to have to have he's going to really have to help stuff runs up the middle in this one. And if he can contribute in stuffing the run, this game will be easy for the Steelers. Therefore, he is my X factor. Simple as that.
All right, Austin. We've covered the game pretty well here. Let's jump into our bold predictions. What are your bold predictions for Sunday's game?
My bold predictions are as follows. If I can scroll down because my thing isn't working. There we go. Juju Smith-Schuster comes up with over 100 yards, a touchdown, and a return over 35 yards in this game. Secondly, Leonard Fournette averages less than 2.8 yards a carry. Third one is that Steelers sacks Bortles 4 times in this one, despite him not dropping back to throw often and their offensive line being good. And 4, one of the sacks comes from Hargrave, and he also adds on 2 other tackles for a loss in this one. So what are your bold predictions coming into this one?
I think Vance McDonald catches 6 passes for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, has that breakout game we've been looking for from him. I think Leonard Fournette finishes with just 75 rushing yards and averages less than 3.5 yards per carry. Blake Bortles adds just 10 yards as the Steelers sack Bortles 5 times and keep him contained in the pocket. Sean Davis adds a forced fumble with 8 tackles and an interception in this one, and Bortles throws 3 interceptions to the Steelers. So before we get into our final score prediction here, Austin, I guess let's think about some important numbers here. What, I guess, the over-unders for these numbers, what is like the over-under number for Roethlisberger interceptions that's going to, I guess, determine whether or not the Steelers win? So how many interceptions would he have to throw for the Steelers to maybe lose this game? I guess let's set the over-under at, is 2 a good number?
I feel like he's going to have to throw, yeah, we could set it at 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I think 2 is good. So I think to lose, he's going to have to go over that, and he's going to have to throw 3.
Yeah, I don't see Ben Roethlisberger costing the Steelers unless he throws 3 interceptions. But if I had to guess as far as what will happen, I'd take the under in that scenario. So I think he'd throw less than 2. I think he might throw 1, but I don't know. This just kind of feels like one of those games where he's just out there to prove everyone wrong. And he's not going to put on the Superman cape because I think he knows he doesn't have to, and it's going to result in a big win here. But I guess outside of that, what about Blake Bortles' passing attempts in this one? What do you think? I'll just set the number at 25, over under for that.
I'm going to go under. I feel like he still is inefficient, and they're still going to try running it, and they realize that. I think that even if the Steelers contain the run game, I think Bortles is that bad, they're going to throw under it. So what do you think?
I'm going to take the over just because I think if the Steelers get ahead by, Well, I think this game is over when the Steelers get ahead by 14 points, and they're going to have to start throwing the ball regardless. They aren't going to have a choice, especially if the Steelers are bottling it up. So I'm taking the over with the thought in mind that the Jaguars are going to be coming back just like Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers were trying to come back in Week 5. Sacks. How about the over-under for sacks? I know you said 4, but I guess let's just put it at, I had 3, so 3.5, I guess. If the Steelers are winning this game, I'd have to say it's over just because a lot of throws means a lot of chances to rush the passer. The longer the Jaguars are in this game, the less likely I think that there are sacks, just because if the longer the Jaguars are in this game, the more they're just going to run it. That's how I see it.
That makes sense to me. I'm going to take the over in this one as well. I'm going to stick with my bold prediction of saying that's going to be 4. So it's over for me.
Alrighty. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we get to our final score prediction here?
No.
Alrighty, Austin. So how do you think this one's going to turn out? The Steelers are 7-point favorites at Heinz Field on Sunday at 105.
I have the Steelers winning 30-6 in a very confident fashion. I have the Steelers covering, of course, since it's a 7-point spread. What do you have?
I also have the Steelers winning this one. Look, the way I see it is that the Jaguars can only win this game if Ben Roethlisberger throws, 3 more interceptions. Steelers turn it over at least 3 times. They just, for some reason, they can't contain the run. They give up those big pass plays. It's like everything has to go right for the Jaguars the way I see it. And that defense is fantastic, but I just think their offense is that bad that they're not going to be able to do anything to keep up with the Steelers in this one. Even an inspired defensive performance is not going to be enough for Jacksonville. And I think the Steelers' offense has just been clicking at the right time, and they've been on fire in the second half. And you can make the argument about rust if you want for resting their players, but I don't really believe that necessarily anymore based on what I've seen. It doesn't look like there's a real trend that's backed up by statistics there. So I don't know. I find it really hard to believe the Jaguars are going to score more than 10 points in this one. I could see maybe 13, but I'd be shocked if the Jaguars score more than 3 times in this one. So for that reason, I'm going to take the Steelers to cover in this one 27-10. If the Jaguars score more than those 10 or 13 points I think they're going to score, I think something went very wrong. All right, Austin, so before we wrap things up, we had a few things we wanted to get to. You want to add your thing first?
Sure. I just wanted to talk about this game feels very reminiscent to last year versus Miami. It's almost, in my opinion, very close. They played Miami earlier in the season and lost by 30 points, 30-15, pretty close to 30-9 in my opinion. And that really affected my final score as the Steelers came back and won that in the postseason 30-12. It was a complete flip around. That really impacted me picking my final score of 30-6. Keeping up with the 30, and that they also score less points in this one. So that was all I wanted to add. It was just reminiscent of playing the Dolphins last year.
Who would you rather have, Matt Moore or Blake Bortles?
Matt Moore.
Yeah, I didn't think that was too hard. This is something I actually saw on Twitter. Think about this for a second, Austin. How many teams would Blake Bortles have started for this season, like at the start of the year, besides, the Jaguars? You want to go through that real quick? I want to see what you think.
At the beginning of the year, well, he came off his bad year last year, so I can only think he was starting for the Browns, possibly the Oh no, they had McCown, and McCown actually did. I would prefer McCown over Bortles, to be honest with you.
Well, let's go by division here.
That's really all I could think of. Maybe Houston at first until Deshaun Watson was ready, but I can't really imagine him starting on many other teams. Maybe over Brian Hoyer and the 49ers too. But do you think there's any more I'm forgetting? Because that's really all I could think of.
I think I'd start him in Denver.
Ooh, that's okay. I mean, I thought I saw some good things from Trevor Siemian, so I would think I'm starting with Trevor Siemian personally. But
now, let me also say that in this instance, the only reason he's on the Jaguars is because they drafted him with the 3rd pick. So let's assume that if that's the case, like that he's starting for one of these teams, it's because he would be drafted by them. That I'm not arguing with you that I actually would prefer Simeon over him, but if the Broncos had invested that pick in him, I think he would be starting there. But I think you look around the league, I think you could say Cleveland, because he's not going to replace Dalton, Roethlisberger, or Flacco. In the AFC East, I think Tyrod Taylor is a better quarterback than him. Certainly Josh McCown is better. Tannehill, Cutler, Matt Moore, they're all better. We don't even need to talk about New England. I said Denver maybe, definitely not the Chargers or Chiefs or Raiders. Maybe the Texans at the beginning of the year. Maybe the Colts, possibly. I don't know. I think I like Brissett a little better, but I think maybe you'd flip-flop around with those guys.
Brissett wasn't there to start the year. You remember?
That's right.
Remember. He only came in to start, I think, in week 2 or 3, because he wasn't. Who was starting for them at the time?
Scott Tolzien. It was Scott Tolzien.
Oh no.
Okay, yeah. So maybe Indy.
I think Bortles has a good chance of starting in that one.
All right, yeah, I could see that.
Scott Tolzien started week 1, and then Jacoby Brissett came in at the end. I'm sorry, I forgot.
I don't know. Well, in any case, I think he would probably start there. So I'll say that. Outside of that, he's there at Jacksonville, and Tennessee is not starting over Mariota. So NFC definitely not. Maybe over Mike Glennon. I'd say I'd start him over Mike Glennon at the Bears. That's the only NFC North team I could think of.
They invested so much money into Mike Glennon, though, and they didn't even start Mitchell Trubisky, who they drafted so high. I don't know. I think they're stupid. Same argument with the Broncos. The Broncos drafted Paxton Lynch with the first rounder and then just wasted him. So there's that.
Yeah. Definitely not with the Giants, not with the Eagles, not with the Cowboys, not with the Redskins, not the Rams, maybe the 49ers. I could see that with the 49ers. With the Cardinals, no, but maybe once Palmer went down, I'd say maybe then, but, not with Arizona at the start of the year. Definitely not Seattle. And then we have the South, so nobody from the South, that for sure. Those are all high pedigree guys. So, what is that, 5 teams maybe?
Yeah.
And that's a hard maybe.
Questionable.
Yeah, so it's looking like that's unlikely. But in any case, our ripping of Bortles is done for now. We might rip on him more following this podcast, but it's also interesting to note that, like, have you ever seen so many players rip on a guy like Jadeveon Clowney or Byard is talking about we want to make Tom Brady's look like Blake Bortles? You ever seen them talk so much about a guy who they're not even facing that week? I've never seen that.
No, I think this is the first time. I feel so bad. It feels like a little kid at recess getting bullied. Like, it's just I almost feel bad for him.
Yeah, and I always liked Blake Bortles when he came out of college. I was hoping he'd have a successful career, but man, he has not panned out. But in any case, a couple things to get to. First things first. Actually, one more thing I wanted to cover. Actually, what are we talking about if the Steelers lose this game? I know obviously it's the Steelers turn the ball over, but what are we talking about as far as maybe not necessarily legacy altering things, but you'd have to view the season as a failure, right?
Yeah, that would be similar to when the Steelers lost to the Broncos against the Tim Tebow-led team in the playoffs. I wouldn't really want to be doing much talking. I'd be very sad. We're going to be talking about how Bortles has somehow managed to get this done. They couldn't stop Leonard Fournette or whatever. We're going to close the season as a complete and utter failure, not even making it back to New England. So what do you think?
I mean, it completely, even though it technically shouldn't, it completely invalidates the terrific regular season the Steelers had. So no pressure, guys, but, geez, don't lose to Blake Bortles again. Jeez. In any case, we have an exciting announcement to add here, Austin, before we wrap things up. As of this morning, we are now on the iTunes podcast app, and we're on iTunes as well. So, round of applause for us. Yay! Oh, my God.
Thanks for the contribution, Haley.
We are horrible, but we made it to iTunes, so it's been quite a wild ride. We've been doing this for over a year now, and it's been a lot of hard work that's paid off, and we wanted to thank all of our listeners for helping us get to this point, and we hope you can all take a listen on the podcast app now. So thank you all for checking it out. It's just search Stronger Than Steel Podcast, and our name will come up, and you can subscribe to us. So appreciate it, and if you have the chance to give us a rating, please go ahead and do that. Give us some feedback, and as always, if you want to find out more information about the show or ask us any questions about the Steelers, email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com, and check out our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com. We have information about our episodes and all of our social media accounts there. So, Austin, thank you very much for joining me today. It's a great day, or I guess morning, as we get ready for playoff football, and it's right around the corner. The Steelers in action tomorrow, and it's going to be a good one. So looking forward to it. And Austin, thanks again for joining me. Thanks to all the listeners, and thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast.
Have a good night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.